Put out your porch light,
of Kentucky,
draw your curtains
deceased.
tight. Welcome again to another episode of Kentucky Deceased, the Hauntings of Frankfort. If you listened to our first episode, you heard all about how some Frankfort residents believed that utilizing a Ouija board or talking board, they were able to communicate with the dead and solve a murder that had previously been a closed case. Now, as I said in the first episode, every episode's content is going to be a little bit different. And this is because, well, we're a limited release podcast, so we don't have a lot of time to set up very many stories. And because the community of Frankfort is so different, we did not want to limit the type of stories we wanted to receive to any one thing. Instead, we wanted to keep it broad and open and available for feedback and input and all sorts of great stuff. If while you're listening to this podcast, you think of some of your own stories that you want to share with us, we here at the Capital City Museum would absolutely love to record them and add them to our collection. So please do not hesitate to contact us. For this first episode this week, what we're going to be doing is kind of I hesitate to say mishmash, but we're going to be covering a variety of different stories. The first thing that you're going to hear is a newspaper article from the 1960s about a poltergeist out in eastern Kentucky. And I know we're limiting things to Frankfort, but I honestly thought this story was too interesting to pass up. So I hope you can tolerate the slight digression. Then we're going to hear from a Frankfort resident about their experiences seeing and feeling the unknown in their own home and the homes of others. And I invite you to consider whether you've ever been in a home that feels like it has a personality. And finally, we have a very special guest, Patty Peavler, who is on the board for the Frankfort Cemetery, who's going to be chatting with us about some of the deceased Frankfort residents who are buried up at the cemetery, as well as some spooky, odd, and bizarre encounters that have happened up at the cemetery. So I hope you will enjoy this week's episode. I'm going to try and not do too much talking and let you just experience. So please, as always, don't hesitate to write me at Hasken, Hasken, at frankfort.ky.gov, or come into the Capital City Museum. We're at 325 Ann Street. We're open Monday through Saturday from 10 to 4. If you come during the week, it's a pretty good chance you might meet me or our city historian Beth Shields or our collections manager Becky Tippett or any one of our numerous and wonderful and kind front desk staff. So please never hesitate to come on down. We would love to talk to you and hear your stories.
Science, Religion at Odds on Carter County Poltergeist. From January 8th, 1969. By George Wolford of the Ashland Daily Independent. From Olive Hill, Kentucky. Science and religion are clashing over methods of ridding a Carter County family of a poltergeist, which has strewn destruction through 5 houses and left family members emotionally distraught. At first, neighbors were dubious of events reported in the John Callahan home on Henderson Branch, for only a few persons, principally family members, could swear they'd seen mysterious movements and the cracking of glass by invisible hands. It was real enough for the Callahans, though, for they cleared out and moved to Zimmerman Hill, a half-mile away. After 2 weeks of peace in their new home, it got worse than ever, and witnesses became plentiful. The elderly couple could offer no explanation for the weird occurrence, which included movement of heavy items such as a refrigerator and chests, smaller items flying through the air, and the appearance of a wraith. A pair of psychical researchers from Durham, North Carolina, associated with Duke University, came and watched for several days, then abruptly left. Before leaving, however, they verified the occurrences and said they were due to PK, a psychical term for an uncontrolled mind over matter. Meanwhile, events seemed to center around a 12-year-old grandson of the family. His mother, a member of Jehovah's Witnesses, follows that church's teaching that such unexplained happenings are the work of demons or wicked spirits. That conflict, apparently, was the reason the two researchers returned to Durham. They retain an interest in the case and have held open an invitation for a program of help based on personal study by a physicist and physician. The youth's father, though, says he does not want to put the boy in a hospital or take him out of school. He has followed other advice of the researchers in keeping the boy emotionally quiet. The occurrences began on November 15th in the Henderson Branch house, where the elder Callahans had lived about 2 years. Movements were violent that first day, then continued mildly through November 21st. After they moved on November 25th, new occupants found the house peaceful, and things were also quiet on Zimmerman Hill. On December 7th, in the new home, movements again began to occur. The old couple summoned a son, Archie, one of their 16 children, for company. He brought with him 2 neighbors, and a third came in during the hectic night. After the research duo came on the following weekend, 2 more nights of violent movement were witnessed. Though the pair kept most of their observations to themselves and would not be committed to the point, others saw that movements coincided with the activity and emotions of the grandson. After his parents withdrew him to isolation in their home, movement went to their house and followed the boy into the homes of 2 uncles. He appeared unable to rid himself of the effect, even though he is not only unaware of what is going on, but disturbed by the uproar surrounding him. Movements at his home have reportedly been more violent than elsewhere, but on Sunday subsided, the family reported. Described as typical poltergeist phenomena, the happenings at the Callahans have been unlike anything known in modern times in this area. "I know it's unreasonable. I'm ashamed to tell you this," said Mrs. Callahan, "because people who hear me think it's a lie. People who came here don't think we're lying." She was describing the flight of a glass bird across a bedroom early in the history of the first house. That first Friday, the initial jolt was a shocker. With only a few of the family about, glass and mirrors and picture frames began to snap, cracking in similar manners through the house untouched. Lamp globes exploded, as did glass and platter whatnots. A great racket came from within the washing machine, and lamps tilted over to break on the floor. The first bad night on Zimmerman Hill included a manifestation of a pale, thin man. Mrs. Callahan and Archie, who said they saw the apparition, were sure it resembled her brother who died 13 years ago. Heavy chairs overturned, the refrigerator moved, picture frames spun on the wall, and small kitchen items flew around. Tables constantly overturned, dumping all contents, and a broom used to clean up the mess returned itself to the kitchen. "This is serious, more serious than anything I'd ever seen in my life," said Mrs. Callahan. "Saturday night it looked like death itself was in this house." When the researchers arrived, the grandson and his father came, invited, to the house. The boy's father doubted what he had heard, but minor movements convinced him. He passed his opinion that a curse existed. At that point, the youth ran through the house, and heavy items moved into his path behind him. The two researchers, W.G. Roll and John Stump of the Institute for Psychical Research, left this scientific opinion on the happenings, which they termed typical poltergeist phenomena. In our opinion, these occurrences are not hallucination or imagination. We found no evidence of trickery or fraud. They are not due to such causes as the house settling, faulty wiring, or similar factors. We have come up against the kind of process we have been dealing with in other investigations of this type, which we refer to as psychokinesis, or PK, a mind over matter effect. This term refers to an energy that, in all likelihood, everybody possesses. It is similar to other human faculties, but with most of us, operates on a confined scale and is not noticeable. This brings me to a third kind of thing we are not dealing with: demons, the devil, or spirit entities of any kind. It is a natural and normal faculty or force which, however, is not under the conscious control of anyone. No one wants or wills these things to happen. Though the researchers, reserved in their statements, would not say what caused them to leave, their departure and statements on demonism coincided with entry of the church doctrine as an influence in the case. Jehovah's Witnesses, an international church with headquarters in Brooklyn, New York, is the only church which holds a belief in imminent danger from evil spirits or demons, according to the church leader at Moorhead, who is responsible for services in Olive Hill. H. Ray Battles, presiding minister, said the church had given the family Bible counsel and advice, quote, "but we cannot live another's life." Their recommendations, also based on a record of past research into similar cases, has been for the family to pray out loud, calling to Jehovah, attend church meetings, and spend all possible time reading the Bible and keeping their minds full of good thoughts. "We also recommend keeping the family united in these goals," said Mr. Battles, "and that they destroy any object recently received." He said he and two other men from his church saw a coffee table in the boys' home rise into the air, flip over, and crash to the floor, breaking its contents.
My name is Sally. Do you want the whole name? Sally Lind Roser McBride McNichols. Originally from Louisville. Oh, God. I could write a book. Oh, God. Well, I'm adopted. And I met my birth mother through the History Center. There was a fellow that does research for families, and I'd been searching for mine for quite a while, and not for anything other than medical reasons. I think that's another can of worms that I don't want to get into. But anyway, he found my birth mother, and so I went to visit them. They sent me a plane ticket to go to Roanoke. We are so much alike. She's recently passed, but she loved white lighthouses. So when I went to Key West, I climbed the lighthouse and took pictures of the lighthouse and brought them to her. And she liked teapots, and that's one of the things I throw in pottery because I have a degree in that. And we finished each other's sentences. And her husband, I had six siblings, half siblings. But her husband wouldn't stay in the same room with us because we irritated him because he could never get a word in edgewise, and we never finished a full sentence because we finished each other. So that's I have a lot of political background too, so if you want to know that. My first cousin is married to Senator Keene, who was the past governor of Virginia. Let's see, who else am I related to? William Henry Harrison. Every time we talk, you amaze me. I know. I was also, one of my ancestors was also the mayor of Louisville before Speed, right before Speed. My father was a physician, ear, nose, and throat otorhinolaryngologist in Louisville. And let's see, his family, his mother and father were Swiss German, and that was his first language. And I learned a little of it, but not the kind I should speak. My mother put an end to that. I can curse beautifully. Oh, yes. And call people horrible names, but other than that. But I've always been intuitive. One thing habit I have is if I think of someone without trying to, they pop into my mind. Within 2 weeks, I either hear from them or see them. So I've always been like that, and I can tell when things happen, before they happen, or as they're happening, miles away from me. So it's kind of, that's why people say, I'm weird. But coming back to Frankfort, I worked over at the History Center and then worked a lot over at the old state capitol. And I was closing up one day, and I was there by myself. I was turning all the things off, and I heard a noise, and I looked up, and there was a shadow person dressed in the era in which the Capitol was built, old Capitol was built. So I watched it, and then I said, "Oh, hi." That's the way I am. I'm not afraid of anything like that. And it just kind of disappeared, just kind of faded out. And then again, the old state capitol. Well, my grandson, when he was little, he refused to go in there because he said it was frightening. And I said, why? And he said, the things. So I guess he's inherited what I have. My younger daughter has too. And let's see. Oh, I was upstairs, and where they have the couch, where a lot of the soldiers, when they were here in Frankfort, bivouacked in the old state capitol. I turned around and looked, and there was the sword of one of the officers' swords on this couch. And I thought, this is weird. But then I'm the one that saw it, so it's not that weird. But I can walk into a house here in Frankfort, and I walked into my daughter's house. They live over on Capitol Avenue. And I said, this is a happy house. Don't worry about it. Of course, it has that jagged front hall, the way they used to build them, so the ghost would not, the old story. But the house we moved in, when we first moved here from Lexington, I hated that house because there was, they didn't exist, but they were blood stains on the walls in the kitchen, and blood used to run down the front the front door on the inside of the house. And I've always kind of been afraid of,
Have you looked up the history of the house?
Do what?
Have you looked up the history of the house?
Not that one. I mean, it was built in the 50s, But, being in Frankfort, it could have been hoodlums. It was in the county, But now the house I own down here off of Holmes Street is 112 years old. Or more now. I mean, it was built in 1912. But occasionally, I would smell a smoke, like a cigar smoke or something like that. I don't smoke. I don't allow cigarettes, pipes. When I was in college, I smoked a lady's pipe. But other than that, I don't allow that kind of stuff in my house. And I always thought that was kind of interesting, whether it was my father who smoked cigars, or whether when I also smelled cigarette smoke, and my late husband smoked. So I said, I don't want to talk to either one of those. They can just go away. I've had it with them. But I can walk into a house and tell whether it's a happy house or whether it's had horrible things happen. I just get those feelings. And my daughter said one time when she was little, she said, Mom, would you tell that little girl not to wake me up in the middle of the night in that rocking chair, which I have now in my living room. And she saw a ghost. It was a little girl. So I've had a history of that.
So I have to ask, what about here? Do you have any feelings, any thoughts?
Occasionally, I feel like somebody's coming up and down the elevator. And if the door opens and nobody's on there, I'd say hi, Occasionally, I'll hear a noise, but not much. It's not.
Goebel's not wandering around.
Oh no, no.
That's good. But do you have a good feeling?
Yes, I do. Otherwise, I wouldn't be here. No. No. It's really. At first, when I heard that it was being renovated, I thought, the ghosts are not going to like this. But I haven't felt any negative feelings. I felt nothing but good feelings since it's been redone.
That's great.
Yeah. Maybe they're happy that we redid it.
Maybe. I will say I do say goodbye to them every day when I leave. Because I'm normally the last one out. So
Yeah.
when I'm leaving, I say, see y'all tomorrow. Every single time. A lot of it is because the mannequins, they give me the heebie-jeebies.
When you're coming out of the restroom.
I'll be walking past and I'll be thinking about something and I'll forget that they're there.
Yeah.
And I'll be walking down the hallway and it's just like,
I know. And it doesn't make any difference how many times you passed it. It still grabs you, doesn't it?
It does. And I don't ever use this restroom. So the few times that I do, I jump. I escape.
Oh, yeah.
I don't normally do that, but
They're so well done. They are. I mean, they're really well done mannequins. So that's a plus.
yeah, it's a selling point, really.
It really is. A lot of children are afraid of it.
Well, who can blame them?
I know it. My little niece or granddaughter is afraid of that figure. She came out of the bathroom and last time we were here, it was opened, and she started screaming.
Fair enough. I can totally understand that.
But the first time I did it, I went, whoa!
Have your grandkids ever said anything? Like, did they inherit the gift?
Not my youngest daughters that I noticed. My 18-year-old grandson, he's a typical teenager. He, went brain dead at 12. But and her little girl, the little bitty one, she has an 18-year-old and a 6-year-old. And no, she doesn't talk to anyone. No, I used to, but
I still do,
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, when I was little, I had all kinds of fun.
Really?
My mother was funny. She said, you spend too much time by yourself and go outside. And I said, I used to tell her that my friends couldn't go outside.
I'm like getting the goosebumps hearing that.
Really?
Yeah, really. I'm not in like a creepy way, but I'm like,
It's neat.
yeah. Lots of people think of the world as finite. You seem like someone who doesn't.
When my mother passed away, this is my adoptive mother, but it's my mother. She's the one that put up with my BS. And so that's my mother. But when she passed away, she didn't leave me for a while because I was upset about some guy, some insane thing. And I can remember one time I was really upset, and she was on my couch, and I just sat down on the floor next to her and put my head in her lap and cried. And it was kind of like, that's all right. You know, she's kind of said it was all right. And then when I finally got myself together, I told her she could go. I gave her permission to leave. So she's never been back. Really? Yeah, but I still have people that I know that have passed away that come back to me all the time.
Do you tell them, like, go do your own thing, leave me alone, and they still come back?
No. And they're the people that are just really weird, are hard to get along with. One of my friends here in Frankfort was a quadriplegic, and he had an attachment to me, so much so that when he passed away, he kept coming to me in my dreams and bothering me. And when I talked to someone here in town that has ESP, she said that don't worry about it. You know, he'll leave once you're tired of him. And he did.
Really?
Yeah. And then my sister, she said my sister who's passed away would come to visit me whenever I hear a train. So every time I hear a train go past here, I say, "Hey, Susan."
No way. Really?
Yeah. Yeah.
That's really powerful.
Yeah, it is.
Did your sister have an affinity for trains, or?
Well, in a way, because we used to spend the summers on my aunt and uncle's farm in Lebanon, on the road to right outside of Lebanon, and he was an engineer on a train, and lost his leg in a train wreck, and so we used to go there all the time, and we used to love to listen to the trains. It would put us to sleep at night. It's just a smoothing feeling. And she said that was the most happiest she'd ever been in her life, was going to the farm and staying on the farm, me locking her in the hen house and in the outhouse. But
Like a good sister.
oh, yes. And she got even, believe me. And anyway, that train, I think, is what keys it, because it was so quiet and so soothing. That's where the train comes from. And I've always had trains, you know. I mean, a room this size full of a train.
Really?
Yeah, I was a tomboy.
No joking here. I think that's so cool.
Yeah, H.O. Gage.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
That's so neat.
Yeah, and I would much rather have played with that than do my homework.
Who can blame you?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah. Yeah, I did silly things when I was little. Like I had clowns on my wallpaper. Mom would put me to take my nap, and she would come in, and I had drawn balloons in all the clowns' hands. The convent school in Wisconsin. I was asleep and woke up in the middle of the nap, and I dreamt that my dog had been hit. My dad called me that night and told me my dog had been hit in the afternoon. See, I have those things that happen.
And so if you don't mind to just start by introducing yourself, however you would like to be known.
I'm Patty Peavler. I'm a lifelong resident of Frankfort, of Native parents and Native grandparents. So Frankfort is my home and always has been and probably always will be. I am talking this morning about the cemetery because I am right now the chairman of the Board of Trustees of the Frankfort Cemetery. And of course, it's a very beautiful place and a wonderful spot for people to come to Frankfort and see just how pretty the city is. We have a marvelous view of the state capitol and South Frankfort. And when you stand close to Rebecca and Daniel Boone's graves, you can just see all over, and it's really pretty. It's stunning.
Do you mind to share a little bit of background about the cemetery?
Well, the cemetery is the third cemetery that we know of in Frankfort. The other two were private, and they filled up rather quickly, particularly the one that's out on Thornhill. And so a group of businessmen, including Orlando Brown and Mason Brown, whose father was, of course, John Brown, the Liberty Hall guy. Mason Brown had gone to Boston, and he had seen Mount Auburn, which is called a garden cemetery, and he came back to Frankfort, got his buddies together, and said, listen, this is what Frankfort needs. So they formed a committee, and in 1844, the legislature chartered the cemetery. It is privately owned. It is owned by the lot holders and is governed by a board. In the meantime, Mason and his friends thought, I really didn't know that marketing was a thing in the 1800s, but they decided that it would be wonderful to have a celebrity buried there. And they hit upon Daniel Boone. Of course, Boone had had bad times in Kentucky and left to go to Missouri, saying at one time he never wanted to see Kentucky again. But both Daniel and Rebecca had died, and they were buried in a relative's cemetery at Marthasville, Missouri. And so several of the men, including Philip Swaggart, who was the first president of Farmers Bank, well, second president of Farmers Bank, you know, all really movers and shakers of the time, they went out to Missouri to see Daniel Morgan Boone, who was the youngest of the Boone children, and he didn't seem to have a problem with moving them. So I don't know who knew where they were buried because there were not any stones, but the Frankfort people got somebody to dig up what they thought were Daniel and Rebecca, and they put them on a boat and started down the river and to the Mississippi, and then they went on the Ohio, and then they went up the Kentucky River, and they got to Frankfort, and they put them in the Old Capitol. So at the appointed day, they had a funeral for them, and it was they were the first people buried there, and they were buried on a cliff, and it, of course, is very beautiful. And supposedly 20,000 people came. Now, Frankfort at that time probably had about 2,000 people, maybe 3,000. So people came from all over, and there were bands and speeches and marching and all of that. And I understand it was in the summer and it was very hot, but they all managed to make it up the hill and bury Daniel and Rebecca. So that was the first big deal at the Frankfort Cemetery. And then I guess at the beginning of 1845, they began to bury Frankfort people there. And I cannot remember the first person buried there, the man, but the first woman there was Elizabeth Love. And she and her husband, Major Love, owned the Love Tavern, which they were very prominent. And the legislature met at the Love Tavern before the first Capitol was built. And Elizabeth Love has another claim to fame. She and Margaretta Mason Brown were unhappy that there was no Sunday school for children in Frankfort. And so they, when the weather permitted, they would meet under the big beech tree at Liberty Hall and give Bible stories and that kind of thing. So she was quite a lovely woman, and she was the first woman buried there. Her son, James Y. Love, had an interesting life. When he was 12, he went to be a drummer boy with the Army. And he wrote her some very dear letters, which the Filson Club in Louisville has. And he bought 10 lots at the cemetery, and they were $10 apiece. And when Mrs. Love died, she was buried there. But subsequent to that, James Y. Love moved to Louisville, and he and his children are all buried at Cave Hill, another very beautiful cemetery. So, Elizabeth Love is there by herself, but of course surrounded by lots and lots of Frankfort people. And her stone was fairly small, and it's the kind that you hit it with a mower or the wind knocks it over or something. And our crew at the cemetery has fixed it. You can tell that it's been fixed, but she is enough of a Frankfort celebrity that we want her to have an upright monument. So that's the Frankfort Cemetery. It has been early on, the legislature wanted it to be the resting place for governors and senators and those folks, and so they bought a little part of it, which we call the state lot, and some dignitaries are buried there, but the cemetery deeded to the state what's called the state mound, and it was to be the final resting place for soldiers from Kentucky from every war. And it started because so many Kentuckians had been killed in the Mexican War. And in 1850, the state contracted with a man named Robert Larnitz, who was considered to be the finest public sculptor in marble. And he designed a beautiful, very tall obelisk, which was to have the names of the people in the battle where they fell. Of course, over the years, it didn't get done a lot of times, but then we started having big wars like the Civil War and the Spanish-American War and World War I. And so the practice of putting people from every war there has, in essence, stopped because there just isn't enough room. But there are lots of men, including Henry Clay Jr., who fell at Buena Vista, and a lot of different people, including some people from the River Raisin Massacre, which occurred in the War of 1812. And unfortunately, it was not marked where they were buried, and over the years a sidewalk got put over them. But the University of Kentucky did extensive work in the 90s, and they found where they were buried and redid the walkway. So now they know where they are and know. Of course, we don't know who they are because they were first left on the battlefield. Then they were buried in Michigan, and then they were buried in Covington, and then they were buried in Frankfort. So, on the state mound, the statue obelisk has a very beautiful statue of victory on the top of it. And one of the men that's buried there is Presley O'Bannon. And the Barbary pirates in the Mediterranean were really harassing naval ships and mostly merchant ships. And so somebody said, listen, we got to go teach those guys a lesson. So they sailed over with Marines on the boats, and they captured the Barbary pirates, and the king of Tripoli, the king in Tripoli, was so thrilled that he gave Presley and several other of the officers scimitar swords. And the Marines, some Marines still carry a scimitar sword. And if you remember the Marines hymn, it says, from the halls of Montezuma to the shores of Tripoli. Well, that was the first time that an American flag was put on foreign soil. And Presley was one of the men that did it. And when he died, he was buried in Shelby County, and the state legislature got him and put him at the beginning of, right at the point of the state mound. Now, at the other end of the state mound is a wonderful monument to Richard Mentor Johnson. Richard Mentor Johnson was Buchanan's vice president, but he probably, though he was a career politician, he probably got to be the vice president because his claim to fame is that he killed Tecumseh. Tecumseh, you will remember, wanted to unite native tribes so that they could successfully keep settlers from Ohio and to a lesser extent Kentucky, because Kentucky was pretty much already settled. But there is a bas-relief of Richard Mentor Johnson slaying Tecumseh, but Richard Mentor Johnson has lost his head, and so he is the headless vice president, maybe slaying one of the most celebrated Native Americans. But Richard Mentor Johnson is there. And one other thing I'll say about the state mound, there is a man from Frankfort. His name is Theodore O'Hara. His father was Keene O'Hara, he ran several schools. Schools were, of course, private back then. But Theodore O'Hara was a newspaper man, and he fought in the Mexican War. And he was, of course, had lost many friends in the war. And sometime later, he wrote a poem called The Bivouac of the Dead. And when I was a youngster, every school child in Franklin County learned that. And I can still remember a little bit of it. But anyway, it's called The Bivouac of the Dead. And Theodore O'Hara talks about how the muffled drums said, "Roll has beat the soldier's last tattoo." And he's saying that now they're at peace because they're dead. It's a very long poem. And the thing I want to say is that even though Theodore O'Hara fought for the Confederacy, that poem is at almost every federal cemetery in the United States. So Theodore is buried in the Frankfort Cemetery. He left Kentucky and went south and was a newspaper man for a time. But we certainly claim him as a Frankfort person.
So, I love hearing about all these amazing, famous, deceased people
Yeah.
that we have here, and it fits this podcast so well.
Mm-hmm.
This is a poor transition. I apologize. However, thinking about the gentleman who lost his head reminds me of purported bizarre events occurring at the cemetery as well. Do you mind to talk a little about those?
Of course. First, I want to say that I have been in the cemetery when it's gathering dark, and it is the most peaceful place you will ever be. But there are a couple of things that have happened along the way that are interesting. One I just learned about a few days ago. Our head groundskeeper said to me, "We had somebody come up here looking for vampires," and he was mowing, and they stopped, and he got off and went over to the car to talk to them, and it was two women, and they said, "Where is the vampire?" And he said, "We don't have any vampires here." So she was quite adamant that someone had told her that there was a vampire. Of course, it was the middle of the day, so he would be sleeping anyway if we had a vampire. But anyway, I thought that was interesting that that somebody would think that we had vampires. But I will tell you that we have a vault that was damaged by vandals, I'll call them. I wish I had them. I'd give them a swift kick. They broke into a vault and took 2 skulls. And this was in the 70s, and, the police, what do you do? So, someone decided that they wanted the skulls for a satanic ritual. That seems pretty ooky to me. But anyway, that was one of the, I think it was really one of the saddest things, because we don't want to have an 8-foot-high fence blocking the view of the river and the Capitol and all of that. So most of the cemetery is on Glens Creek Road is there's a chain link fence, and across the back there's a chain link fence. Many cemeteries have fences, some ornamental. I know there's one in Louisville that I passed by, and it has razor wire at the top. So it is a problem for people wanting to have a little fun, to go in at night and that kind of thing. But we have not really ever had a problem with that, because our groundskeeper lives in a house at the front, and before he closes the gates at night, he drives through and takes his dog with him, and his dog goes back and forth and back and forth and back and forth and sees every bit of what's going on. So anyway, those are 2 things. But the most fun thing that I think is 2 of the women that worked in the office thought that sometimes they were not alone. And one afternoon, one of the ladies heard someone whistling in the back office. And of course, she goes back there, and, there's nothing there. And then another time, she's typing and really intent on what she's doing, and she knows somebody's behind her. So she turns around, and of course, there's nobody there. So along the way, they start calling their spirit Clarence. And Clarence will sometimes move things. Mostly we have lots of piles of records and things, and sometimes Clarence will move things. Well, one day, one of the women had lost a file, and she was just in a panic because she couldn't find it, and she didn't know what had happened to it. So before she left in the afternoon, she said, "Now, Clarence, I really need that file. I hope you can find it for me." And in the morning, it was on the top of the pile. So she loves Clarence because he helped her out. The rest of the story is, long ago, when there would be funerals at the cemetery, the men would don white coveralls, sign of respect, clean, all of that. So we have things stored in the, it's not really an attic, more of the ceiling of the office. You end up with so many things that you probably don't want to throw away, but you really don't have a lot of space for. So we have put things up there along the way. And so one of our crew was up there looking for something. I think maybe it was Christmas decorations or something. They were going to put a little tree out. And he found a bunch of these white coveralls from, maybe the 20s or 30s, certainly a long time ago. So he just picked one up and brought it down to show the women who worked there, "Look at what I found. This is what they used to, wear to be respectful." And when they turned it around, the name on the back was Clarence. And neither of those women had known about a Clarence that worked at the cemetery, but he did, and he's most helpful, and we're glad that he's here, and we hope that we do right by him. Sometimes the office gets a little piled up with things, and maybe he's just, I don't know, trying to clean it up or something.
I love that because I think so many people have a perception of a cemetery as a scary, kind of dark place. But, other than this satanic ritual, it doesn't seem like there's really any incidents of that.
No, there isn't. And like I say, I've been up there at night. A couple of years we had hay rides, a ghost event, and we had people to play various Frankfort people, and they would step out from behind the stone and tell a little bit about themselves. And so, it was full dark when we were up there, and it's peaceful. It's not scary, mainly because it doesn't look like the churchyard with the leaning moss covered, Now we do have some moss covered monuments, but it's a very peaceful place, and it is a very restful place. We have people who walk up there every day. We had over the weekend, the participants in the half marathon that the History Center put on. They run through the cemetery, and they run in silence. And I don't know whether they had it this year or not, but in years past, they've had a bugler to do taps while they were up there. So I don't feel like that it's disrespectful for people to come up there and walk around. I would say if you want something to do on a beautiful afternoon, go and read the monuments. In section F, it belonged to Good Shepherd Church for a number of years, and it is consecrated ground, and so the Catholic faithful that passed on were buried there. And the man at the time who was Mr. Lynch from Lynch Monuments was of Irish descent, and he knew the Celtic symbols of vines and different kinds of flowers and things. And if you walk through that section, you will see a lot of the people have put where they're from in Ireland, because they left. They knew they would never be back, but it'll say native of Ireland or native of County Cork or whatever, and I find that to be, I think it's heartbreaking because they knew they had to leave, but yet it was always in their heart. One other thing I'll say about the cemetery, most of the stones are stone. We have one that is metal, one monument that is metal. It's very small. It's the monument for a 3-year-old boy. And I think for a while, metal monuments, were a thing, but they evidently did not catch on too much in Frankfort. But this young man was one of the Buckley family, and the Buckleys lived outside of Millville, in Woodford County, and the Buckleys gave a large and very beautiful farm to the Audubon Society. So that I always think of what good people they must have been to leave their farm for a bird sanctuary. So,
before we say goodbye,
yes,
do you mind to share with the audience how they can get involved with the Frankfort Cemetery if they would like to be?
Absolutely. The cemetery office is open from 8 to 4, 5 days a week. Our office manager does, because she's a one-woman office, does go to lunch at 11. But we are always looking for people who might be interested in doing a walkabout, a tour. Somebody who's interested in Frankfort history could certainly pick that up. We often would benefit from extra funds. We lose 5 to 7 trees a year, and it's because the cemetery is up so high. When storms blow through, it just devastates big old trees. And about 15 years ago, we had what's called a straight line wind come up out over the river. And of course, I think the river also plays a part in how the winds are and that kind of thing. But anyway, we would like for people to give us a tree, have us plant a tree for them. We love to have visitors. 2 things I will say: don't park on the grass, even though you think you're being good by scooting over so that somebody can get by you. There are many people buried in the cemetery who have no monument. And of course, at first, when people were coming in buggies and on horseback, the roads were not very wide. And over the years, they've been widened. And so there are, right next to the road, there are the remains of people. And the other thing is, unfortunately, and I still think this is something I wish we could work on, we cannot have campers, buses, anything very big in the cemetery because they cannot make the turns and they hit the low branches of our big old trees. So it keeps a tour bus. They can come and park in our parking lot, but the hill is pretty steep. Now, when we have children come in school buses, they jump off and run up the hill, and the teachers are lagging behind. But we have on occasion said, if we could have some golf carts or something like that. And we do have a golf cart. So if you're coming in an RV and you really want to see the cemetery, I'm pretty sure that Sarah would drive you at least up to Boone, because it is certainly worth seeing.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Patty. This was great.
You're welcome.
Thank you for taking the time out of your Wednesday to join us for this episode of Kentucky Deceased. Later this week, we're going to publish another episode that is going to include written material, written ghost stories by two very wonderful Frankfort individuals. I also want to put at the end here a really exciting and fantastic announcement. If you listen to the first episode of this podcast, then I am really pleased to share with you that we actually have an update on this case that I shared, as well as some more information, some more context, and some more Ouija board related encounters. I'm going to be working on that episode and going to be releasing a bonus episode with that updated material probably next week, and if not, then definitely the week after. I'll give you more updates as I myself know more too. I want to give my deepest and most heartfelt, sincerest thanks to Hasken-Wagner, who read the first story for us today, which is a news article, again, that was published in the 1960s out in Eastern Kentucky, but was found in a file relating to Frankfort, so I thought it would be fun to share. Next, I want to thank Sally McNichols, who is one of our front desk staff here, for her wonderful and amazing stories of her series of bizarre and fantastic occurrences here in town. And finally, thank you so much to Patty Peavler, who is another one of our wonderful front desk staffers, who shared with us some of the Frankfort Cemetery history, legacy, and important stories from that cemetery. If you haven't been up there, I cannot encourage you enough. Patty talked about the beautiful views of Frankfort from the cemetery, and it's true. Every time I bring visitors in from out of town, and every time I visited Frankfort before I moved here, I would always and will always take them to the cemetery to see the wonderful and gorgeous overlook views there. Can't recommend it enough. Absolutely, you should stop by. So thank you so much for joining us, and I look forward to seeing you on Friday.